You may have seen a story today that's been all over social media and covered quite extensively, though quite biasedly, by the mainstream media, that claims Turkish football fans, soccer fans, were booing and jeering during a minute's silence to remember those killed during the Paris attacks. It was a game between Turkey and Greece in Istanbul, in Turkey. And of course, the general reaction to this in the UK, in the US, over here, is those dirty, rotten, ISIS-supporting Turks. How could they be so disrespectful? This is just proof that all Muslims are supporting ISIS. The media pounced on the claim that some fans were shouting Allahu Akbar because that's what terrorists say before carrying out suicide bombings and so on. It's being framed to make it look like the Turks are fucking atrocious people. Now, I did a little bit of digging, and the picture that's starting to emerge makes this story a lot less cut and dry. First off, Turkish people are very boisterous in these kinds of situations, when they're mourning, when they're giving their condolences. And hear me out on this, I'm not being an apologist for awful behaviour. If all you've seen is the headlines, you don't know what happened. So at least consider some context and a different side to the story. I'm not saying there wasn't some genuinely awful behaviour, but there's more to it than that. And I actually witnessed some of this firsthand in September when I was in Turkey. At that time, 16 or so soldiers had been killed in an attack by the PKK. A lot of the clubs and bars were closed for a couple of days out of respect. And whenever evening came, or actually it happened quite often in the day as well, convoys of vehicles with young people, troops, friends of soldiers and so on, raced through the streets, honking their horns, waving flags, hanging out of car windows, shouting, and it was their way of paying their respects. As a reserved English guy, it was quite a sight to see, but the locals explained that it was a celebration, it was their ritual, their way to respect the dead soldiers. So when you see this clip on Twitter or the news sites where it sounds like the fans are booing, I think in part what you're actually witnessing is their energetic way of paying their respects. That's just kind of how they are over there. And when you listen to it, it's not all clear-cut booing. There's actually some chanting going on. And when you go through the Turkish websites and Turkish tweets and so on, they're saying that the chanting is something these football fans do every time there's a moment of remembrance. They do the same thing when remembering their own dead at football matches. Mustafa Azari writes that when they are chanting, it roughly translates, "Martyrs, they do not die, they are immortal, our land is indivisible." They booed the terrorists, not the victims. Any victims of terrorism are accepted as martyrs in Turkish culture. There is no disrespect to them, there has not been, there will not be. And as I say, when you look into this, they're actually chanting the same thing that they chant in very similar circumstances when remembering civilians and Turkish soldiers who are killed during this ongoing conflict with the PKK. Now, I know there's a hell of a lot of baggage that comes along with this whole Turkish-Kurdish issue, but what you really need to understand in relevance to this story is that in the eyes of the general Turkish public, the PKK are seen in a similar light to ISIS. In fact, the Turkish government will often say that when an attack happens, we suspect that this was either the PKK or ISIS. They're put in the same category. And I know in reality the Kurds are fighting ISIS, and I know that Turkey has actually been a hub where ISIS terrorists and weapons have crossed the border, But just like most people in Western Europe and the United States don't know the details of how we have actually fomented the Syrian conflict and how we've supported ISIS by backing the rebels against Assad, and weapons that went over there, and the foreign policy that led to ISIS filling the vacuum and so on. Just like that, the regular people in Turkey also do not necessarily know that their government has sort of been playing both sides as well. So that's one aspect of what I think's going on in this clip. A second aspect is that over the past few months, Turkish sports fans have been at odds with some of the governing bodies because they've not been allowed to have moments of silence for the Turkish attacks by the PKK. Here's an article from back in September regarding a basketball game against Germany. Through Google Translate, it basically says that they asked the FIBA for a moment of respect. It was rejected. The coach said, "We talked to the FIBA about having a moment of silence before, but we failed to convince them." When you do some reading, this seems to be an ongoing thing. In October, as I say, I was in Turkey in September and some attacks had happened. But then in October, there was an even bigger attack that killed over 100 people. And there was no international moment of silence for Turkey when this happened. There was no people having moments of silence in football matches and so on. And this has been a contentious issue from the Turkish public, which I suppose is somewhat justified. So when you see these soccer fans and think, look at these crazy Islamic extremists, I'm 99% certain what you're actually seeing is a combination of people showing solidarity, respecting the dead in Paris, just like they do their own dead with the chanting and so on, just in a culturally different way than we might pay respects. But there may have also been aspects of booing and jeering based around the fact that the Turkish feel disrespected because football organisers and basketball organisers haven't let them have moments of silence or moments of respect for their own instances of terrorism. An international double standard. Could things have been handled better? Were there some legitimate twats who were making a mockery of the whole situation? Yeah, probably. But don't make the mistake of thinking these were rabid Islamic extremists who hate the West and all Muslims are ISIS. Politically, Turkey are our allies. They're a NATO country. As far as the general public is concerned, we're both hand in hand fighting ISIS. While a lot of us know that's not quite true, when we're talking about the masses of people at a soccer game, I think it's pretty clear that this didn't go down in the way that the headlines have suggested. So I just thought I would raise some of those points with you guys today. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you again soon on Wide Shut UK.